We see this pace of innovation keeps on getting faster. The same way like ChatGPT reached 100 million users much faster than Netflix did. Netflix was faster than mobile phones. Mobile phones were faster than the internet. Things can go much faster than we think. We sometimes overestimate what can be done in 1 year and underestimate what can happen in 5 years. Who would have said just a year ago that the next US president will be supporting Bitcoin so much? I wonder if the US government will announce a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or they would rather start accumulating behind the scene. Many governments are doing it, most of them are not saying it. The ETF success were really amazing. It was a major push and transformation for Bitcoin. Bitcoin ETFs were the most successful ETFs ever introduced in the US. And this is just the beginning. When the gold ETFs were introduced, year 2, 3, and 4 kept on growing. The inflows kept on increasing. So we expect the inflows into Bitcoin ETFs to grow in 25, 26, 27. You make a simulation, how many Bitcoins you have, how many you will acquire the next couple of years, when you retire, and how you can live out of that.
Usually, I don't ask my guests to introduce themselves, but I think it's very interesting to know your background as a CEO of many big companies. So what did you do so far, and what's your background?
So I'm a global CEO with experience across the United States, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Most recently, I used to be the CEO for Red Bull North America before leaving Red Bull and before that I was a CEO for Red Bull Asia Pacific. And then the last 15 years I was CEO for a family-owned business which was acquired by private equity. So we moved from family-owned to private equity-backed. I did my IPO in Saudi Arabia in 2016, and I was a CEO for a publicly listed company. That's my background. And the last 20 plus years, I was independent non-executive director on several companies where I very much enjoy supporting boards and CEOs and management teams
Really cool.
across
I
multiple
love that.
industries.
Amazing. Maybe just directly jump into that for like Bitcoin for CEOs, Bitcoin for professionals. It's a big jump. Yesterday or like the day before we had something with Bitcoin for African women, and it's a big jump now as a contrast here. I think that's what I try to do in the Bitcoin podcast, to have as many perspectives on Bitcoin as possible. How did you, as an extremely busy CEO of big companies, came to Bitcoin? Like, how did it cross your radar?
That's a great question, Robin. I heard first about Bitcoin in 2016. I was at a wedding, and a young cousin from the family was doing a PhD on Bitcoin in 2016. And he told me at that time, Bitcoin will ultimately reach 100K one day. I was I was so busy with my full-time CEO role and the boards I sit on, I did not really pay attention to it until 2019 when I was at an investment conference in Washington, D.C. about technology and innovation. I have a I have a hobby and I love technology and innovation. I invested in many startups. And I was there listening to, at that time, quantum computing, AI, biotech, solar technology. And then there was this gentleman on stage. He came and mentioned Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And I said to myself, Selim, you missed the train in 2016. You will not miss another opportunity in 2019. So I got intellectually curious. I rolled up my sleeves. And in 2019, I started learning about Bitcoin. And I followed a very simple strategy from 2019 till today of simply DCA, buying on a weekly or monthly basis and holding Bitcoin. I never sold my Bitcoin. And I was spending a lot of time on my free time because CEOs like myself and board members are super busy, Robin. They don't have the time to follow X and follow YouTube and podcast. So I really gave a lot of my free time on my vacation, walking for hours, listening to podcasts and reading books. The Bitcoin Standards was my first book, and making research online. And frankly, it's very lonely to be a Bitcoiner because there are very few people around you who understand it. There are very few people who will be interested in listening to you. And many people would laugh at me when the price goes down. And when the price goes up, they think I'm a genius. And I went through this journey for 5 years. What was really amazing for me were few things. The conferences. I attended multiple Bitcoin conferences before we meet in Abu Dhabi. And I was impressed by the talent and the smart people from different industries, from the tech industry, from the finance industry. Even we had people from JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs in Nashville in July 24, and from law firms and regulatory environments. So when I saw all this talent, I said, oh my God, I'm not that crazy. There is something, substantial behind Bitcoin. Today, I have to say it's much easier for people to learn about Bitcoin. It's much easier to get on board. And I say to many friends of mine, guys, you cannot disregard the most successful ETFs which ever happened in 2024. Maybe my background as an engineer, I studied computer science engineering, did help me in getting down the rabbit hole because the more I learned, Robin, the more I had questions. And it can get very technical, very challenging. I understand people who tell me, I don't have the time for it. I don't understand it. I respect those people. However, I get a bit disappointed from people who don't do their homework and simply repeat, Warren Buffett said, I would not buy the whole Bitcoins for $25. Or Jamie Dimon, until today, saying most of the Bitcoin transfers are drug related. They People who are not on board use those statements as an excuse to justify their position. I don't know anyone who did their homework and got facts and who does not, somehow believe into it and decide to dip their toe into Bitcoin.
And I also want to make this episode, I'm really excited also for this one because I think it always makes sense if you hear it from a peer. So if someone in the audience has some C-level executive as an uncle or as a father or as like someone, as a friend or something like that, and they cannot get to them, maybe they're like, hey, here is a C-level executive. Maybe he can explain it to you in like 1 hour or something like that. Maybe you listen to them because I think we like to hear from our peers, rather from someone that we cannot relate to. So, that's why I have like teachers also on, and because like teachers probably cannot relate to Michael Saylor, but the same way as an executive cannot relate to a teacher maybe that much. So I think that's really important to have Bitcoin education and adoption in there.
Very true, very good points. And this is why when I talk to my peers, many of them who are 50 years and above are in their comfort zone, Robin. They have a winning formula, the 60-40 portfolio, or they have a real estate, portfolio, and they are doing X% per year, 5-6% per year, and they are very happy about it. And there is no sense of urgency. However, I tell them, guys, the world is changing. There is so much inflation. We are all going to live longer than our parents and our grandparents. Many more people will reach 100 years and above. And how do you secure your financial well being as you're aging? In the past, people used to retire at 60 years old and they could live well for 25, 30 years. We are going to stay longer. And that's why I appreciate that CEOs are very busy and board members. Unfortunately, today, Robin, there is no one single place where those people can quickly go in 1, 2, 3 days, get a download of Bitcoin. Professionals ask me, Selim, how can I quickly learn about Bitcoin? I don't have the time to go on X. People, C-level professionals, don't have your time and my time to spend at least 1 to 2 hours a day on podcast and on X. And I'm looking forward to the day where business schools like London Business School, INSEAD, IMD in Switzerland, Harvard introduce a Bitcoin course. This would be a fantastic education for CFOs, CEOs, and equivalent to go there, get a quick download. So what I recommend to CEOs around me, please read the Bitcoin Standard. It's not a big book. 80% is very interesting, is about the history of money, and 20% only is about Bitcoin. So you will learn a lot. There should be a place where CEOs, CFOs can get a quick download. Because today I'm trying to orange pill some companies to consider adding Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And the challenge is people don't find an easy way to learn about Bitcoin. So when I tell them, read this book, go to those websites, follow some people on YouTube, watch some YouTube videos, they don't have the time, to be honest. Agenda of CEOs and boards are very busy. Boards, Robin, are meeting 4 to 6 times a year. We have every meeting is roughly 3 to 4 hours maximum. Board agendas are very loaded. And companies, frankly, have decent profits and decent dividends. So there is no sense of urgency. The challenge we have today, how can we educate this target audience in a much better way? And when you see the Microsoft shareholder voting outcome, where only 0.55% supported getting Bitcoin on the balance sheet, people are using this against me by saying, Selim, even 5 or 10 or 15% of shareholders. 0.55, this is a joke, forget it. Let's please have a more serious discussions. So now Amazon and Meta will vote. I assume the outcome will be similar, unfortunately. But the day one large publicly listed company gets Bitcoin on the balance sheet, this should be similar to what the ETFs did on January 11 for institutions, pensions, high net worth individuals, and family offices. I'm really waiting for this day. But even if this day happens, assume tomorrow Meta approves Bitcoin on the balance sheet. You have a population of CEOs and CFOs and boards who have to do their duty and their homework to understand Bitcoin before recommending it. And there is a challenge. I'm trying to make a list of experts whom I can bring to some boards. But again, it's extremely time consuming. I think things will change the next 5, 10 years, but this is really a long journey. But there are fantastic opportunities for corporations who embrace it today, but it's a process which will take quite some time. There is a beautiful report from River. I don't know if you saw it a couple of months ago, listing private entities and publicly listed companies, how better their performance is since they adopted Bitcoin. Today, there are 60 publicly listed companies adopting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And by the way, there are many implications for a company to adopt Bitcoin on the balance sheet. The last one was Rumble 48 hours ago. Rumble adding this. So we can't follow anymore. Every day there is a new company adding Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And then when you do that, when you see the performance of Bitcoin, you start asking yourself many questions about other investments.
Operations is a really interesting topic. It's also, I think, most people don't realize how busy C-level executives are, and also don't realize that they are the keys basically for the corporate adoption. We always talk about the corporate adoption of Bitcoin and corporations adopting Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, it's still individuals, it's still human beings that adopt Bitcoin, and it's then those C-level executives that make the decision if they do it or not, and it's really vital for the Bitcoin adoption. My question would be like, you mentioned it with the ETFs. How helpful was how big of an impact made the ETF, the BlackRock involvement, and traditional finance people coming more and more into the space? How big of an impact did that make on those companies?
ETF introduction and the ETF success were really amazing. It was a major push and transformation for Bitcoin, I would say, moving from retail investors to institutions, from what we call weaker hands to diamond hands. When you see pension funds, when you see large institutions endorsing Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, when you see the Bitcoin ETFs was the most successful ETFs ever introduced in the US. When you see the inflows into the IBIT year one are much more than what happened into gold ETFs since 20 years. And this is just the beginning, by the way. So ETFs are major tailwinds for year two because historically, Robin, when the gold ETFs were introduced, year two, three, and four kept on growing. The inflows kept on increasing. So we expect the inflows into Bitcoin ETFs to grow in 25, 26, 27. That's a major tailwind. This is a fantastic. Plus, another major transformation and tailwind is the US administration moving from being a headwind to being a tailwind in 25. Not just the president himself, but most of the administration around him are pro Bitcoin. There is a lot of positive changes happening. Now we expect the president to repeal SAB 121, which was a major bipartisan bill which President Biden vetoed in the past. And SAB 121 is major because it will allow corporations, banks, to hold Bitcoin for individuals and corporations and give them loan. The FASB accounting rule is major for corporations because as of December 15 only, I don't know if you're aware of that, as per the new FASB accounting rule, companies can report the profits they make on the Bitcoin they hold. And this was not the case in the past.
Yeah, that's major for the corporate adoption, and that's a overlooked thing often. What do you actually expect for the coming years in 2025, but also in the coming years 2026, 2027 for Bitcoin, when we now have a positive administration in America? We have ETFs going. We have kind of the groundwork for everything that we worked really hard is now laid. The education also, as you mentioned, is getting easier and easier. So it's the level of education is getting better and better. What do you expect for Bitcoin in the coming years, especially for corporate adoption?
I'm very bullish for corporate adoption and for institution adoptions and high net worth individuals because of many things. The ETFs, number one. Number two, companies getting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Michael Saylor, 42 billion fundraised to buy Bitcoin. This by itself can be a major driver. The US administration policy change, the FASB. By the way, BlackRock now officially recommends minimum 2% allocation. Charles Schwab recommends 10% allocations. I was really surprised when I watched this interview by a person at Charles Schwab. And President Trump, reversing SAB 121. There are a lot of things. I'm not even mentioning the big topic today, which is countries buying Bitcoin on the treasury. Utah just announced before we speak now that they introduced a bill. There are today 11 states. 20% of the US states have introduced a bill to buy Bitcoin on the treasury at the state level. We are waiting still for the executive orders of President Biden. I think the first day one, it was amazing. They launched 100 executive orders. Now we expect in the other 100, there will be something related to Bitcoin. The rumor out there that there is something. There are so many tailwinds, frankly. And BlackRock said recently the adoption of Bitcoin is faster than the adoption of mobile phones and the internet. We see this pace of innovation keeps on getting faster. The same way like ChatGPT reached 100 million users much faster than Netflix did during COVID 4 years ago. Netflix was faster than mobile phones. mobile phones were faster than the internet. So as we move ahead, there will be much more innovation the next 10 years than the last 50. And therefore, I say to leaders of organizations and board members, you have a duty of foresight. You have a duty of innovation, of supporting companies as they evolve. And part of your duty is to really consider a major, new asset. Like you cannot disregard Bitcoin today. It's a $2 trillion asset. It's very risky to disregard.
That's the biggest thing. That's the riskiest thing to completely ignore. That's very true. How can we reach, or in general, because we touched the topic that we have to make platforms to reach those executive or C-level executives better. How can we reach them better? Like, what kind of formats do we need? Is that education for them already available in your mind, or do we need new programs, or like what do you think we can reach the C-level executives better?
There is information out there a lot, but it's scattered between some books, between some papers from BlackRock. BlackRock has a very nice 6-page paper. The rumor out there, 6 page is like the white paper, the same length, number of pages. There are some documents from Fidelity, but when we share them, you and I, it's not enough, I think. It's a good starting point. But when a well respected business school or corporate governance institution, even though it's not their job, introduces this topic, it would be extremely appreciated. Now, there are some Wharton programs about blockchain in general, but I think what's required is a Bitcoin course. The first business school like INSEAD or IMD, because this is where executives go. I have been attending so many executive education courses the last 20 years. I went to all the business schools almost. INSEAD, Stanford, London Business School, MIT, for various courses. And I learned a lot. And that's where corporations are paying a lot of money to send their individuals there, their executives there. I think this is one way. Another way is to create a platform where somebody summarizes in a condensed, easy way Bitcoin for professions, for C levels.
We we're getting better and better in educating people, but we have to get more targeted. Also with the group thinking, the network effects are slowly coming. One thing with that, what I was wondering, you talked before with like, we need one big corporation to come into Bitcoin. We have one which is kind of into Bitcoin with Tesla, which is a huge corporation. But they only have 10,000 Bitcoin. They have the potential to just buy way more than just 10,000 Bitcoin, which is a lot of Bitcoin, but for Tesla, not that much. Why is that not a bigger of an impact? Is it because Elon is too crazy? Do we need like a Meta or like an Amazon or an Apple to come into the game?
Tesla is holding Bitcoin, you're right, but they hardly ever talk about it. And Elon himself hardly ever talks about Bitcoin. He hardly ever posts about it. I don't know why. And he's very different than Michael Saylor. MicroStrategy is very focused by thinking about increasing the number of Bitcoin per share, while Tesla is just holding it on the balance sheet. Tesla is a fantastic company. It will be, one of the major leaders and top performing stock the years to come. However, Tesla has, I think, not focused on Bitcoin. Maybe they are focused on their core business. But the day you see a well-respected, and also sometimes Tesla is considered like a one-man show with Elon. But when you see a well-respected, large, Magnificent Seven or other blue chip company in the US endorsing Bitcoin, this will be like a wake-up call for many companies.
Do
It's a matter of time, I think.
Do you think you mentioned it, the number of Bitcoin per share is like this new kind of metric that comes with the Bitcoin corporations now, where also Michael Saylor is talking about a Bitcoin yield. Do you think Bitcoin per share could be almost like earnings per share in the future, where it's a really important metric to track?
I think I'm not sure about that, to be honest, because not all companies are as focused as Michael Saylor and MetaPlanet are. And those, by the way, are the best performing stocks in the US and Japan, respectively, in 2024. MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet. Other companies, other CEOs I know have Bitcoin on the balance sheet don't think along those lines. They think I want to allocate X% of my cash to Bitcoin and I'm building my Bitcoin reserves step by step. And it's very interesting that Bitwise will be launching in March an ETF with a portfolio of companies holding Bitcoin on the balance sheets. They're not talking about Bitcoin, not about Bitcoin per share, but they are talking only in general as Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And another angle to convince some companies is to tell them, guys, there is so much disruption in today's world. There is so much innovation coming our way. AI is a major game changer. There used to be monthly AI updates on latest news, then weekly, and today on a daily basis. I tell them MicroStrategy was a very decent business until 2020 with very little growth. And Michael Saylor discovered Bitcoin and transformed the company. And today, history tells us what the results are. So buying Bitcoin on the balance sheet, Robin, can be a kind of insurance for some companies where they say there will be disruption coming up. We don't know what the future will look like for us. We are really challenged in our core business. We are nervous about it. If we buy some Bitcoin on a regular basis, we start building a potential asset which can be very valuable in the future and which can help us invest in other areas. That's one angle of presenting this to organizations. But
Ah,
again, the challenge is many companies are in their comfort zone, like many like Kodak and Blockbuster and BlackBerry, and very few, maybe some, not very few, but some leaders are not that agile and willing to consider change and innovation.
that's true. That's really interesting. One aspect that I also think about, you just mentioned it in the beginning of our talk, was that there are so many talents in Bitcoin. Like there's this one thing of like C-levels kind of seeing Bitcoin, but there's this another thing of like this grassroots movement where Bitcoin comes into the company with the talents and the employees that come in the company. Is that something that maybe in the future where a company kind of has to have a Bitcoin friendly setting, because there's a huge recruitment pool of Bitcoiners out there that want to work, but they only want to work for like Bitcoin friendly companies, or even like Bitcoin companies that have offer maybe a part Bitcoin salary or bonuses in Bitcoin, or have some other kind of programs, or the employee knows, okay, the company is saving in Bitcoin and therefore is doing something good. Is that something that you looked into?
No, I did not look into that. For example, the Dubai government now just authorized payment of salaries in Bitcoin. But frankly, I think this is an extra step, not really necessary at this moment. Companies who want to really learn more about Bitcoin and they want to discover this asset, they can do their regular means of attractive packages, working environment, flexible, working from home versus being in the office to really attract talent. Um, and by the way, when you hire Bitcoin experts and people who understand Bitcoin, those people will come and will start influencing the culture of the organizations. But I would not go as far as saying I want to change the culture of the company and the way the company embraces Bitcoin through salaries, compensation, and other benefits. I think the first very simple step is very simple somehow. Get some Bitcoin on the balance sheet, track it, monitor it, do some DCA, dollar cost averaging, and then learn more about it as you go. But you are right, there is a lot of talent in the Bitcoin industry. And it would be amazing if this talent can spread and start joining some well established blue chip companies to start triggering change.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. And then the grassroots movement starts from from within. I fully agree with that. Really cool. How do you when do you see this Bitcoin corporation adoption happening? Is it depending on who's kind of moving first as the big company that kind of gets the first time into Bitcoin? When do you foresee that, or what events do you think needs to happen that we have those Bitcoin trigger events where we have in the adoption in the corporate world also more and more adoption of maybe now it's one S&P 500 company with Tesla that has a Bitcoin. What has to happen that 50% of the S&P 500 companies have Bitcoin on their balance sheet?
I think today you see well established blue chip companies. I would not state a percentage, but an IBM or maybe a non-tech company embracing Bitcoin, or a tech company, one of the Magnificent Seven, embracing Bitcoin. When you see a country or a US state adopting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, or when you see a country in the Western world or in Asia, a large country adopting Bitcoin as a strategic Bitcoin reserve, this will trigger a wake up call. And then at that moment, many corporations will start, wondering, what do we do about it? Also, when you start benchmarking the performance of your stock at your company versus others holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, this is, I think, to be very interesting. By end of 25, there will be the ETF from Bitwise. And I really look forward to comparing the performance of this ETF versus other ETFs and other companies because it's very difficult to compare to MicroStrategy because Michael Saylor is so extreme with 460,000 Bitcoins. And people tell me this is a unique case. There is no other, Michael Saylor around the world possible. But when you see an ETF with many companies in the portfolio performing so much better, questions will be asked. This will take, I think, it's a 5 to 10 year journey. And the winners will be those who embrace the strategy first. And I say to companies and to boards, guys, start with baby steps. No need to rush. Just be curious. And one of the most important skills today is intellectual curiosity for people at board levels. There is so much change happening. There's so much innovation. It's very tough to stay relevant in the room with all this innovation happening around you. I spent so much time myself learning about AI, longevity, well being, latest corporate governance development, about Bitcoin. I love learning myself, personally, and I encourage others to really learn. In today's world, getting out of university with a degree is not at all sufficient to stay up to speed with all the change happening around us. And a great university, by the way, is YouTube. You can learn so much on YouTube if you select the right channel. But do invest time in your personal development. There are some great investment. One great investment is Bitcoin. Another investment is your own personal development and try to influence people around you. But we will
That's
be
great.
surprised.
Yes.
I think things can go much faster than we think. We sometimes overestimate what can be done in 1 year and underestimate what can happen in 5 years.
Absolutely, it's kind of crazy also for me to think back because almost 5 years ago I came into Bitcoin like 4.5 years ago, and just thinking back how different the Bitcoin world was 5 years ago to now, it's crazy how far we have come. And then seeing that exponential growth curve till like 2030, that seems to be yeah. It's hard to imagine what can happen in that time frame, especially if we have so many amazing examples with MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet and other companies that just like have such successful stories. CFOs, CEOs all around the world have to look at this and say, oh, what are they doing? Like MicroStrategy, what business model do they have? Oh, this business model, how can this business model have such an amazing stock performance? Oh, it's because of Bitcoin. Oh, maybe we should look into this. So it will be harder and harder to ignore the longer it goes on and the more successful it goes on. So I'm really bullish on on the next few years. It will be a golden window of opportunity, I think, for corporations also.
You're 100% right. Who would have said just a year ago that the next US president will be supporting Bitcoin so much, or that the US administration will be so much pro Bitcoin? When when the ETFs were started on Jan 11, 24, try to remember the Bloomberg forecast and others' forecast. The forecasts were 50% of what was achieved. Nobody thought we'll be where we are today. And maybe what helped me personally is my experience with Red Bull over 12 years, Robin. When I started in 1998, I don't even imagine how old you were at that time. In 1998, you were very, very extremely young, if born at all. And then there was so much skepticism and so much worry about energy drinks, how safe the products are, what are the ingredients, what is taurine, does Red Bull or energy drinks, do they kill people, and so on and so forth. And having lived this, the birth and the establishment of a major new beverage category of energy drinks, which are today mainstream. But this was not the case in 1998. And I saw it over my 12-year career. This did really help me to understand and be patient with Bitcoin the last 5 years. So People have to be patient. People have to do their homework and have some vision to imagine what Bitcoin can do. And every time in the history when a technology was introduced, there were many skeptical people. Like when electricity came in, when the first car was introduced, there was so much, fighting from the horse and carriage industry. When the first airplane was introduced, and so on and so forth. So we will be here in 5 years looking at, you remember 2024, how small the adoption was and where we are?
That's
The,
amazing. Yeah. Wow. And I like also, by the way, 1998 is actually my birth year. So you hit it right on, like 1998, 9th of September 1998 is my birth date exactly. And Red Bull, obviously, people know I'm from Austria. Red Bull is also an Austrian company. So I know the company, of course, and the headquarters is also not that far away from my home back in Linz. Yeah, it's a great company overall. It's interesting. I think we can learn a lot from that. What could we learn from Red Bull overall, as you've been with the company for quite some time, that we might use in Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
it's a fantastic company. I was really, blessed and honored to having worked there in Europe and then running Asia and then running the US. And today people look at the success of Red Bull, major success story, but I can tell you it was a huge, adventure and risk and dedication and hard work from the founder, Dietrich Mateschitz, rest in peace, Dietrich, amazing visionary who had really extremely tough time to launch an energy drink in 1987 in Europe. And I can tell you the challenges the company faced at the beginning and the skepticism and the fights with regulatory authorities, with the large beverage companies, with distribution were very, very significant. And the company made it. And I'm very proud to having been part of that team. It's a fantastic team at Red Bull, which explained the result. And I think when I look at the talent at Bitcoin conferences and the smart people and the dedication of the people who are there, I'm very optimistic about the future. And I say to my friends, Red Bull gave me wings, and also Bitcoin can give you wings. Bitcoin can give you wings in a way it can support your financial freedom in the future.
I
And
love that.
yeah, 100%. And by the way, when people look at Red Bull, they think it's a bunch of young people or just junior staff. And this was my expectation from Bitcoin people. But I was impressed by the white hair at the Bitcoin conferences. I always call it white hair, experienced people. And the same thing is at Red Bull. You have a lot of very senior, experienced people who supported leading the company to where it is today. And I'm confident when I meet the talent at the Bitcoin conferences, they will be able to address the challenges and the risks. We hear that there are two risks for Bitcoin in the future. Will Bitcoin remain secure? Will Bitcoin remain decentralized? Those are the two potential risks. I'm not an expert on the answers. I did a lot of homework. I researched it, but I think it would be good that we discuss more about those potential risks to reassure people about Bitcoin. But I'm
Yeah, it's
confident. I trust the
interesting.
system. I trust the developers and the organizations. I don't know if you have an opinion on those risks, Robin.
I do think that Bitcoin will work out on some of the scalability issues that we might face, on some of the risks that come from the software. So I do think that we come to that. Also, interesting input from the age. I was also really surprised because I thought when I came into Bitcoin, there will be a lot of Bitcoiners like my age. I'm 26 years old now, and having a Bitcoin channel right now. and I run my own Bitcoin channel with this here, and I'm 26 years old. I see the audience statistics, and audience statistics tells me one thing: there are more people listening to this podcast above 45 years old than under 45 years old. So it's like 55% above 45 years old and 45 under, which is kind of amazing for me that the audience for Bitcoin podcasts is so much more mature than I thought it is. And I think that also represents when you go to a big Bitcoin conference. Of course, there are young people there, but the majority of the people are actually quite experienced and already way more mature than I thought of, and apparently also you thought of. So I think that's really something bullish to look like, because I sometimes hear like, oh, Bitcoin is so for like young people, and like it's a young thing of like, no, if you actually look at the industry, it's a grown up industry. It's something where a lot of experienced people with a lot of life experience also come in here and put their skills and their life experiences into this industry, and it shows. Yeah, Bitcoin is amazing. And then we have the other side with the cryptos, with altcoins and meme coins. There is where I think a lot of the younger people are. But the Bitcoin only crowd, the Bitcoin focused crowd, especially, I think that's a whole different game. And it's also great to see that you have seen that, and that you see kind of that development in Bitcoin. I love that.
100%. 100%. And I have to say, I really love your podcast because you always bring a different person. And it's very impressive the energy you spend on doing those interviews. And by listening to the perspective of the different experts you bring, like a teacher or an investor or whatever, I always learn something new. The format of your interview is very interesting. It's quite long, it's 1 hour, but the beauty is there's always a new angle. While with other podcasts, it's very often the same people coming in, and it gets a bit maybe boring, and we are used to what those people are saying. So congratulations for really standing out and for the dedication of doing a daily interview.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a great ride already, and I love it. And every day I actually love it a little bit more, and it gets also easier. It's so second nature now to talk with most of my guests. Like, it's actually rare in our instance where I already met you before we recorded. That's really rare, actually. Like 90% of my guests I never spoke to in real life or online before I jump into the conversation, because we reached out like on Twitter, or we some guest is recommending another guest, and then we just set it up and say like, oh, let's talk, and then we talk usually 2-3 minutes as we did before the recording, and then we record. And so I have every day a new conversation with a new stranger.
Yeah, it's extremely rich. Well done, Robin.
Thank you so much. One more thing, or maybe two more things that I want to get into the podcast is, especially for someone that is like I currently don't really look at Bitcoin for retirement, because retirement is for me like it feels like so long away. But you also brought that angle in, like how do you see to Bitcoin for retirement, Bitcoin as an asset for your retirement in 5, 10, 20, 30 years, when it's coming a little bit closer? How do you look at that?
What got me into Bitcoin is me thinking already since a couple of years about how will I maintain my standard of living and live well during my retirement. And I don't believe we can really rely on the social security system, which we have in Europe, with populations aging and less young people coming in. Birth rates are extremely low. I think sooner or later there will be a problem with social security contributions. And I kept on thinking, maybe it's about long term. How can we, maintain our standard of living? And having discovered Bitcoin, I was lucky, and really, we are very. All of us should be very thankful for what Satoshi did with the creation of Bitcoin. And I have a model where I look at the Bitcoin I have, and I have my simulation on the potential performance of Bitcoin over the years, and thinking, how can we live out of the Bitcoin holdings we have? Of course, one should not assume the 45% CAGR performance the last 15 years, or even the 60% performance the last 4 years. You take a much lower CAGR, 15% assume, over the next 40, 50 years, and you can see what you can take. There are two ways. Either you spend your Bitcoins or you can borrow against your Bitcoin. And most of the wealthy people, high net worth individuals, I'm not one by the way, historically have lived by borrowing against their assets. A lot of banks are working on offering now products where we can borrow against our Bitcoins. It's the very beginning of this industry. It's something to look at in the future. But otherwise, you make a simulation, how many Bitcoins you have, how many you will acquire the next couple of years, when you retire, and how you can live out of that. But once you get into the Bitcoin mindset, I think your spending behavior changes and you start thinking, how can I accumulate more Bitcoin? I don't know if that's happening with you, Robin, but I see it with many Bitcoiners. I want to have a decent life. I want to enjoy. I want to travel and so on and so forth. But also, I want to maximize the Bitcoins I have. And once you start being confident and you taste the performance of Bitcoin in your portfolio, it should be the best performing asset. You start wanting to maximize your holdings of Bitcoin. I know some high net worth individuals who are really Bitcoin maximalists. Even a very well famous one, I'm sure you know him. He just sold his house a year ago, and he had a big argument with his wife 18 months ago. He sold the house to buy Bitcoin. He did extremely well, obviously, with 120% performance in 2024. I'm not saying we should do that, but we should all think about accumulating more Bitcoins. And the best strategy is do it on a regular basis, DCA. And I'm coaching my kids, by the way, to save in Bitcoin instead of doing the
Very good.
S&P 500 or triple Q, which are great ways, by the way, of savings. But I think in today's world, my kids I told them you have to spend less than you earn. They earn what I send them every month because they are studying at university, and they have to spend less and save some money, and they are allocating to Bitcoin on a monthly basis.
Especially with small kids, actually, I don't know how it's in America, but in Austria, you cannot open a bank account or especially not a stock account before the age of 18. I think you always need the parents for that. Maybe there's some special thing with 16 years old. But if you want to send your 12-year-old money, Bitcoin is kind of the only way to do it because they can have a bank account, but not really, not a full one. Definitely not a stock account, especially in Austria. I don't know how it's all over the world, but I also don't think that 12-year-olds can have stock accounts on their own name, but they can have a Bitcoin account. So that's also an interesting aspect of it. And I know a lot of Bitcoin parents that give their kids, no matter if they are like 2 years old or 5 years old or 12 years old or 18 years old, they give the pocket money in Bitcoin, in Satoshis, in either on-chain or Lightning wallets. And I think that's a great way to teach the kids already about money and saving and see that happening out. It's really beautiful. One thing is also interesting with you, just thought about that. You see in America currently the strategic Bitcoin reserve topic coming up and up again. With you being You were in Austria, in Europe, you were in America, Asia, you're right now in Dubai. What do you see as the global game theory currently going on? It's some guests described it to me almost like a Bitcoin Cold War, where the different sides of the nation states kind of just wait till the first one buys, and then they move also, and it's kind of like this silence before a storm potentially.
Are the president of Russia today, Robin, and you are buying Bitcoin, would you announce it to the world? So I think many governments are today buying Bitcoin. I don't want to say the majority, but many of them in Asia, in the Middle East, Russia is buying, the Chinese are buying, and nobody is announcing it because you don't want to start having, as you mentioned, a Cold War or a race and a very huge price peak. And therefore, I wonder if the US government will announce Bitcoin as a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or they would rather start accumulating behind the scene and then announcing it later on. Maybe from a regulatory and legal way, they have to announce it. And now we see what's happening with the states. But sooner or later, government will start racing and accumulating their Bitcoin holdings. But it's happening as we speak. There are rumors that the UAE government is holding 300,000 Bitcoins. It can be possible. The UAE government is really so innovative, so much ahead of the game. They had an AI minister in the UAE 7 years ago, a minister of AI, so much ahead of the game. So I would not be surprised if the UAE is already accumulating. Marathon Digital is having a JV in the UAE with the government mining Bitcoin. And they are doing the same thing, I think, in other Gulf countries. So to answer your questions, many governments are doing it. Most of them are not saying it. And it will come to life over the coming years,
I
definitely.
love that. Yeah, I think so too. Really cool. We have one question that I ask each and every one of my guests towards the end of the podcast, and it's super interesting to hear maybe what we can learn from you as a CEO of big companies. And the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I'm extremely passionate about corporate governance and effectiveness of non-executive independent board directors on companies which are family owned or private equity backed or publicly listed companies. This is where I spend most of my energy and my time. How can we, as board directors, add value in the boardroom? How can we advise CEOs? How can we develop the art of asking questions? I think as a CEO, you're really skilled at getting things done, at executing, and of course, defining the strategy. As a board member, you should develop the art of asking questions because CEOs don't want to hear from you, Robin, what you tell them to do. CEOs will be inspired by the questions you ask to make them think, to make them think about things they did not think about, to challenge them through your thinking. And being in a boardroom of a family owned business is very different than being in a boardroom of a private equity backed company. Just to take those two examples, when you're a private equity backed entity, private equity is all about financials, KPIs, turnaround, growth, results. Family owned business is about the family legacy, the family goals, the developing the generation, managing potential conflict between different family members, and so on and so forth. So as a board member, you really have to develop this skill and this ability of adapting your style depending on the shareholding. That's really my passion, and that's what I love talking about.
I love that. Yeah, maybe we can make a second round around that one day. Could be interesting also for the audience. Perfect. And thank you so much, Selim, for being on the show. Before I let you go, we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is an interesting one. It's almost impossible to answer, but still would be interesting to hear your opinion. Which year will be the next Bitcoin soft fork occur?
I hope never. So there was a Bitcoin fork war in the past, and I hope there will never be any more fork. And this is a potential concern for many people. What happens if there is a fork happening, occurring? And I think we will only have Bitcoin. And in the past, there were other forks like Bitcoin Cash, for example, and others. And all of them did not perform like Bitcoin did. I hope we will only have Bitcoin and that's it. However, what is really concerning potentially is the ETF paperwork of BlackRock. When they write in the prospectus of the ETF, if there is a fork happening, they can decide. I don't know if you're aware of that. BlackRock can decide which Bitcoin to continue with. Because a fork means a different version of Bitcoin, means the programmers have different opinions, means a potential conflict. I hope it will never happen.
Yeah, yeah. Also, just for the listeners, there's like different kinds of forks. Like there's hard and soft forks. So like I think like soft forks is kind of like an upgrade to Bitcoin, which is backwards compatible. And yeah, the hard forks are the ones that as you mentioned, the ones that we hope. I hope that's not happening. At least not in a way as we had it in 2017 with the block size wars. I also do hope so, and yeah, will be fun. I think it will be a lot of exciting discussions coming our way. Bitcoin is constantly attacked by a lot of actors, and I hope BlackRock is not one of them. But even if BlackRock is one of them, I think we can. I think Bitcoin showed that it has a lot of strength and can survive a lot of headwinds also. But yeah, will could be a fun time the next 5 years to be in Bitcoin evolved, entertaining and hopeful, also successful in that way.
Just to make a comment, 100% agree with you. BlackRock is here to make money and to maximize return for their shareholders. My comment about the text in the ETF prospectus was just, I think, a question which people are discussing about. I believe it's just legal wording, which I can see in many prospectus of many companies to protect themselves. I think it's Larry Fink is really an amazing person to be able to change his mind of where he was 5 years ago to where he is today. Larry Fink has been the chief marketing officer of Bitcoin in 2024. He has endorsed it in such a big way, and he is in the business of making money for the shareholders and not in the business of creating another Bitcoin or whatever. So
That's a good point. Yeah,
yeah,
like
100%, 100%.
he's
While you
out for
see other
the.
people like Jamie Dimon continuing until today of repeating the same thing again and again, and I say to people, please watch what his company does, not what he says. His company is very much behind the industry while he is claiming Bitcoin is for drug dealers. So watch what they do, not what they say.
I'm a big believer in that. Like, watch what they do and not what they say. It's the same thing for Elon Musk, by the way, where he talks about Doge and not about Bitcoin. But Tesla only bought Bitcoin, and he also says himself, actually, in podcasts, that he owns way more Bitcoin than Doge. So it's always like, watch what they do and not what they say, because what they can say anything, but doing is the real proof of work and the real action that they show, and where they reveal what they actually do themselves. And I think that's a great insight. Like, watch what they do and not what they say. Yeah. Thank you so much, Selim, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
On LinkedIn, Selim Chidiac, my first name, my last name, on LinkedIn. That's why I am on X, but I'm not active. I just use X to follow news, but I don't really communicate there. People, however, I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being on the show. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.